All right, everyone. Welcome in UGA Football Live with JC Shelton and his former Georgia tight end Arthur Lynch. Good to have him back on. Plenty to cover today. We're going to touch on some season review as a whole, talk about what went wrong a little bit with Notre Dame, what Georgia has, at least at this moment, for 2025 and beyond, what we kind of can work through there. But we're going to start it off with a hard hitter here, Artie Lynch, and it's not really huge for Georgia in one aspect, and I'll explain why, but just about 3 hours ago, Carson Beck revealed his plans to enter the transfer portal, and he had previously announced his declaration for the NFL draft in December 28th, I believe. Now, Artie, I'm going to throw it to you for this as a guy who's been in through that process. And what do you think caused him to kind of walk back that NFL declaration? And do you think it's the right move for him? I'll let you kick us off here.
Yeah, it's probably pretty simply probably came back with like a second or third round draft grade, and regardless of what you think, he probably can make more money in college. And so I think, and you'll see that now with a lot of guys, particularly quarterbacks. Whereas if they're not like projected a top 15 guy, which really means like, hey, you're gonna go in the first round for sure. Doesn't mean you're gonna be top 15, but you're most likely getting in the first round. And they play at a school that has the ability to, via collectives and NIL, give them $2 to $4 million. It's a no-brainer. Come back because you have the security of the money that you're going to make, which is a lot, probably as much or more than being a second or third round pick in the NFL. And if you play really well, you can play your way back into being a first round pick. So, I saw Aaron Murray, a close friend of mine, friend of the show. He said, just that, he's probably going to make $3 to $4 mil. Smart decision. And, some team will pay him that. And maybe that team is Georgia, right? Just because he's in the transfer portal does not necessarily mean that he's not going to come back to Georgia. All being in the transfer portal means is they are a current free agent. And like in the NFL, if you were a current free agent, there's nothing that says you can't sign with a team that you were on the year before. Now, I don't necessarily think he's going to end up back at Georgia. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. I don't really have an opinion on that. I have an opinion on it. I don't have an idea. But I think it makes total sense. And to be honest, I'd probably do the same thing if I were him. If I was him, like being a quarterback in the same situation, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Well, I don't think this is a big change for Georgia is because you were already preparing to not have him.
Yeah.
Right. So you're already preparing for him to go off the NFL. Jaden Rashada is in the transfer portal too. So you knew you'd have Gunnar Stockton, Ryan Puglisi, and then Coulter again, the 3 stars signed in last year's class. And then maybe you shopped one and got one in the portal, which again, we talk about the transfer portal now, there's another window opening in the spring. So you're going to have more guys after spring ball announcing their declarations too. And that's just like when Rashada, that's when he transferred into Georgia. So there's plenty of time if Georgia wants to add another one. So I don't think it affects them there. I agree with you there, and I think we're not the only ones to say that either. Like you just mentioned, Aaron said that too, and I kind of agree with that because, what do you make in second or third round per year, Artie? Is it $2 million, something like that? Or is that a little much? Am I high?
Well, 10 years ago, I could tell you the numbers exactly, but they're slotted. So your salary is always going to be the same, but you basically, let's say he gets picked like the 15th pick of the second round. Just you can look up the contract of that same pick last year.
Mm-hmm.
Add like 3% to that or 5% to both the signing bonus, and that's kind of what you're looking at. I mean, I can't imagine he's going to get any more endorsement. Well, he would probably get more endorsements depending on where he would land, right? Like,
Yeah.
trading card, but I'm pretty sure like all of that has been baked in because the endorsements that you got as a rookie, like kind of that free, like play money, right? The 5, 10, 15, 20 grand, a lot more if you were a quarterback or a big name guy from like Tops playing cards or like I imagine that already happens now in college because that's the definition of NIL, right?
Yeah, it is.
So I'm not necessarily sure, like, to our point, right? Like how much more money, like how much more meat is on the bone. And it ultimately comes down to him to where it's like, I'm going to bet on myself. I think I think I could be one of the best 32 quarterbacks in the league. And he might, he's definitely has the toolkit to be, but it's like, the NFL is a different beast. It's
Mm-hmm.
a different beast, right? Like there's so many good players, right? That like aren't even on a team, right? Who could just like Joe Flacco, for instance, Super Bowl MVP, $100 million contract at one point. Like, he came off the couch a year ago or 2 years ago, whatever it is. Like that's kind of the talent that you're dealing with.
Yeah.
So, I think he's making the right decision. And honestly, this is one of the benefits I think of more so for basketball, college basketball than probably football. But I do think the NIL will incentivize kids or student athletes to stay in college longer, right? Because they
Yeah.
now have an opportunity to kind of like, well, I'm going to make probably the same amount of money in college or more. So that's kind
Yeah.
of my thought process.
Yeah. And I think that's the right decision because, in producer JC, myself, I didn't have the numbers for the second and third round, fourth round, what they're going to make, but it's probably going to be less what he's going to make because, reports around the top earners, especially at quarterback, are around the 3 million range for top guys. Your average guy is getting like 700, 800K. That's the recent numbers I've seen. So Carson, he's probably going to demand at least 3 million. You think about his track record as a starter and, finishing third in the nation in passing last year. And I think from that standpoint, where you have one season as a starter where you were awesome, that's a great season last year, right? And then this year, inconsistencies up and down. Yeah, we saw the same Carson Beck at times that we did last year, but other times it was like, who are we watching here? And that's not all on him, but that's just kind of the reality of the situation for him. So then you add another year, right? And, Carson, it kind of, it's making Georgia fans laugh a little bit because the report from Pete Thamel was like, quote, he wants to win. That's from Beck's camp. And I'm like, well, he could win. He's been winning at Georgia. I mean, I don't know why you added that in there, really. But he's probably going to go to a major program that has that money, and he wants to have talent around him. Obviously, right? You think about what he had with Brock Bowers, Lad McConkey, and then this year with the issues at receiver and such, and a porous offensive line at times. He wants to go to a team that can shell out that money and has a lot of talent around him to make him look even better. So yeah, right decision. We'll see where he ends up. I've heard, Miami is kind of the obvious favorite. Well, everybody can see that because his stinking girlfriend goes to Miami and plays basketball there, and he's from Jacksonville.
Is Will Howard Sr.?
Yeah, he's out of eligibility. I just wrote.
There you go.
Yep, I wrote a post on Ohio State for Athlon Sports. If anybody's wondering, Ohio State and Texas Tech. Which, Artie, do you know that Texas Tech is just killing the transfer portal right now? Number 2 in the country behind only LSU.
That coach is legit, though. He came from like UTSA or somewhere. He's a winner.
Yeah,
and they're pouring a ton of money into that.
Absolutely.
Honestly, Patrick Mahomes has been kind of like the point man for the fundraising aspect of it. But just for context, for all of our listeners are out there, the Mike Sainristil was picked, and I just did this arbitrary number with the 15th pick in the second round last year. 4-year contract for $7.7 million, right? But the only part of that was a signing bonus. So 4.3 of that was guaranteed, and then 2.4 was given up front for a signing bonus. So you think about if you're like, make a hypothetical, right? Let's say he got a mid-second round grade. typically if you get mid-second round grade, you're typically probably going to fall, right? Because they're judging you based off like your talent versus your positions. They're not judging you based on the entire class, right? And so different needs. It's not really a strong quarterback class per se. So it's like there's
Oh, you're right
probably
there.
not going to. It's not going to be like not a lot of quarterbacks are going to come off the board early, what have you, right? So you think about him, he's like, okay, well, max money I'm going to make in this contract is 7.7. 4.2 of that is guaranteed, and 2.4 of that is a signing bonus. So, what if I just go to a college? I made $5 million this year from Georgia. I go ahead and make 3 or 4, which is about the same what I'm going to make at the NFL anyway, or at least from a guarantee perspective. But make that in 1 year, not over the course of 4 years. And if I ball out under Ryan Day or heck at Georgia or wherever, now I'm a first round pick, right? So I think
Mhm.
that's kind of how these guys are thinking about it. Because it's just it's a black hole, man. It's a
Yeah.
black box when it comes to the NFL draft. And I just think that he's probably making the correct decision and the smart decision.
Yeah. And then just wrapping it up with Georgia's perspective too, beyond just, they were kind of preparing without him anyway. Um, you think about, what he demanded because Georgia paid him to stay.
Oh, yeah.
That's reported, well known, been known for a while. It didn't honestly work out from that perspective for Georgia. So are you going to pay him again what he demands as a 2-year starter, 24-3 record, and what have you, that he's going to get from other programs? Or are you going to say, hey, we're going to move on. We're going to pay Gunner as a guy who's only started one game, and we're going to pump that money into other areas of our team, which we're about to get into. There's some holes. And those holes ultimately kept you from moving on in the college football playoff.
Yeah, totally agree. I think the market for him is not what it was last year, right? And what I mean by that is, he was coming off a great year. They had a good run, won a lot of games. So I don't know what other teams are willing to pay for him.
That's fair. That's fair. Yeah.
So
We don't
again,
know. So I'm just talking hypothetical, I guess. But yeah, that's fair.
Totally. So I think Georgia, if he was like, hey, I want $2 million to come back, I don't think that's the number, but they'd be like, maybe. It depends how they feel about Gunner, right? And we will learn quickly how they feel about their QB room. Either A, if they pursue Carson Beck, or B, if they go pursue other guys in the portal, or one or two guys. And if they don't pursue anybody, that's telling us that, hey, we like Gunner and we're going to roll with Gunner. So
yeah. And as far as the quarterback transfer class right now, I mean, it's the big names are taken, right? They've already made their commitments to joining their teams. But let's say Georgia's not too happy with what happens in spring ball with Gunner in that QB room, Puglisi as well. I mean, it's happened before. You can get a top guy who just transferred the winter window, and then, hey, Georgia needs a quarterback, and they've got this talent, and Kirby Smart wants you to lead the Bulldogs for a season. Yeah, they're going to leave for that. It could happen like that too. So yeah, things to consider for Georgia moving forward there at QB. But let's get into this, Artie, because we haven't talked on the show with you about the Notre Dame game. And it felt like to me, and I just have a couple notes here, is kind of the issues that plagued Georgia throughout the season, which at the same time, you won an SEC championship, you won some big games on the stretch, resilient as all get out. You were able to overcome these things, but in the end, it kind of hurt you all in one game, which was certain things that Georgia's going to be addressing for sure. They've already, receiver wise, drops, blocking whiffs, not as good blockers as what you had Marcus Rosemy, Jack Saint, that team last year, guys like that. Separation, obviously. But obviously the drops is the biggest part. And Georgia's kind of addressed this already in the transfer portal at receiver. Offensive line, Artie, me and you text about this, I think on the night of the game, which was like, we were surprised that, Monroe Freeling, he's a 6'7", 5-star, 330 pounds, just absolutely getting whipped, right? Allows 2 sacks just alone. And it was just a one-on-one pass set. And he gets taken by a Notre Dame defensive line that was smaller. and by all means, not as highly recruited. And I asked you if it was like a coaching situation or talent. Maybe he had played well this season at that spot, redshirt freshman. And what are your thoughts there on the offensive line? As you got in there and with your hat in the game blocking too, so I feel like you know what you're talking about.
Yeah, we've talked about this before, but like the offensive line is a team within a team, right? There's like you have this camaraderie, this trust, this like team culture, like collectively across the locker room. But then like each position group kind of has their own niche thing, but really that bond between the offensive line is really unique and unlike anything else. So I say that to say this, like typically when that bond, that culture, that like camaraderie is very strong, it's they gel really well in the field and they kind of play as one, and right guard can move to left, the center, the guard can play center in a pinch. You have a swing tackle, one guard could typically move out to tackle if need be. And I think the thing that really, not like bothered me, but just like that I picked up on. Nothing really bothers me when I watch like football. I just try to like pick up on cues, and
Mm-hmm.
our tackles just didn't play well all year, and I am hesitant to say that it's because they're not talented enough, because I'm pretty sure at this point that the program that Kirby has built, the types of people that they recruit, and like the expectations and the standard is too high for them to just like roll someone out there who's not good enough, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's a core issue with the entire offensive line. I think there's poor communication. I think some of the technique is off. Not always, right? But I thought there was a lot of inconsistency within the offensive line. And then when you pair that with, a lot of drops in the exterior, right? And we don't talk about this, enough. And I know he's a great recruiter, but that, we didn't have those drops when Brian McClendon was the wide receiver coach, right? And people are like, well, that's irrelevant. Like their position. No, it's not irrelevant, right? It's coaches are intentional about the standards that they set within their position group, right? There's the overall team standard, and there's an offensive and defensive standard, especially. But then, like, in those, I think with the offensive line and with the wide receivers, I thought there was a lot of correctable things that just never seemed to be corrected, right? Yeah. And so that was something that stood out to me. Interior line didn't play poorly all year, but for some reason,
all three of those are going to get drafted well too.
But it was like I think it was the Ole Miss game that like.
Oh yeah, what was that? About 5 sacks, 6 sacks that game.
But the tackles, like this is for people at home, like it's silly to think about it this way, but it's true. It's like playing offensive tackle when you're making that pocket. It's all about geometry, right? Like the straightest, the fastest way from point A to point B is in a straight line, right? So like the angles of your feet on your first step and your second step and pass, bro, have to be very specific, because you don't want you want to be have a strong base, not be able to get bull rush, but also not lean into it. But as you're kind of like stepping out, you also want to get depth as well, because the quarterback is also moving back, and you kind of want to, I'm not an offensive lineman, so I'm going to do a poor job of explaining it, but like it just seemed like these offensive tackles were like opening up their hips way too early, right? And when you're opening up your hips, you're basically just like, instead of diagonally moving down to create a pocket, it's like you're kind of swinging open. And as soon as you swing open, you there's an angle that's created for the edge rusher, right? I'm not an offensive line coach, So I can't
It
fix
made
it.
sense to me. It made sense to me. I think people
But
understand what you're talking about.
that was interesting to me. I was like, their angles are off. That first step, it's like, you know, and maybe that was maybe the tackles got inside their own head because there was a psychology to it, right?
Yep.
Particularly when you're playing a good pass rusher.
Hey, just
And
like
that's
the receivers and the drops, there's a psychology to that, right?
100%, right? And so, look, I don't know. I mean, I know people are saying there needs to be changes and this and that, and you know, I'm always hesitant to be like, we got to fire everybody and this and that because it's just like they're it's like we won the SEC championship game, right? So
Yeah.
it's like if we went 8-5, I'd be like, yeah, we probably need a lot of change. But if we do have a full change of staff, whether that be the OC or if it's just the position coaches, it's like there is a time period that it takes for these players to like get up to speed with a new coach, and the new coach with the players. So it's
Yeah.
I think Kirby has hard decisions to make because
Yeah.
clearly we did not win the last game, right? Your goal every season is you want to win the last game. And man, it's yeah, like that game left a lot to be desired.
Yeah.
And I think you and I text were like, it's the same old shit. You know what I mean?
Basically, that's what I
And
think. It's more like you didn't lose in crazy fashion to where something maybe you did well the entire season kind of bit you, right? It was the things that we had kind of seen all season, and that just kind of paints a larger picture of what's the disconnect, because there has to be one. But it ain't just. I don't think it's the talent, folks. I mean, those are top 3 classes recruited by Kirby Smart every year,
yeah,
right? So then it brings me back to having a new running backs coach, first time running backs coach. It brings me back to bringing Coley back. This is his first season back at the receiver. Now he's recruited well at receiver, obviously. 2 really good transfer portal guys we're about to get into soon. But is that it? Do they need another year with it? Which I think, if you leave the group as it is, Georgia fans aren't going to be happy, of course, because they're already calling for it. But we are in the midst of the coaching carousel. It's happening right now, and you have to make those
totally.
decisions soon, right? Because these guys are getting already hired at other places, and I don't know who's left, to be honest with you, right? I don't know where Georgia will go with that. But if it's offensive line coach and coordinator, I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah. So listen, just for example, yeah, go ahead.
I want to make one point. So, like, Nick Saban would always talk about you have to be able to recruit. And if you guys for college football fans out there, a great book. It's called Meat Market. It's kind of like Aching to the Blind Side, but it specifically talks about like recruiting. And this is like back in the day. Bruce Philbin wrote it. I read it in college or in high school, and it was just fascinating because it kind of dive deep into like the mechanics of like college recruiting. And to be a number one program, you have to recruit at elite level. We know that. But if you look at like Nick Saban's run, that first half, like he was like, it was really good coaching that like they were able to turn it around in 2 to 3 years. And then it was just recruiting. Then they were like, okay, top 2, 3 classes, year in, year out, year in, year out, right? And then like towards the end, when college football really started to change, right? The spread offense took over. Like these kind of air attacks was no longer like a Texas Tech thing. It was all over the country, right? He started looking at like, okay, I'm going to recruit a certain type of player, but I need to bring coaches in who have like NFL pedigree or are known to be tier 1 developers of talent, right? Bill O'Brien, he was not brought in to recruit. Sark was not brought in to recruit. Lane Kiffin was not. They could, right? But they were brought in to be like, hey, make our offense elite, right? And, I think that's one thing that Kirby probably is looking at is like, okay, I'm going to have a top 5 class no matter what, probably just by the standard that we now have set at Georgia, right? Like when Coach Rick was there, every class was in the top 10, and then we took it another level, right? Where Kirby's now like he's top 1, 2, 3, or 4 every year.
Yeah. Yep.
So now it's like, okay, we know we can recruit, even if we have a brain dead coach who can't has no emotional intelligence, but he can coach the hell out of guys and get them developed. It's like, I think that's probably the next phase or iteration of this Kirby Smart era is we need to like go and develop guys from and he does a great job of that. I'm not saying he doesn't, but
Yeah,
it's like I think those like NFL type coaches is probably what he's going to look at next. Because
that's a good point.
if you look at Saban, it changed like that, right? And granted, a lot of coaches would leave and and so he had to like plug and play, and it was easier to plug and play with like NFL guys or et cetera, et cetera. But I thought that was very interesting because, it's now more than ever, it's like you want to develop these guys because you got to be able to coach them up because they might leave in a year with the transfer portal.
Yeah. And just for example, so we'll stick on offense for a second. 1,742 yards rushing this season. That's the lowest output since 2006.
It's
right?
bad.
And you led the FBS in drops. And also, you're the only team in the SEC to have 3 receivers with 5 or more drops. And listen, when people record drops, they give them the benefit of the doubt. They're like, oh, was a defender there? Did he maybe touch the ball? Right. So there's more than that. Okay. It's more than whatever they're saying. I promise you. And I think those two things maybe work off each other. Could you come in with a guy like Carson Beck and he's going to throw it around everywhere? And then that happens with your drops. All of a sudden, you're trailing in 9 games this season. So your rushing output's not going to be great by that point, probably. But take it how you will. It is the worst since 06. And we already talked about the offensive line, which allowed 67 tackles for loss, 25 sacks. That's the most in the Smart era, right? So just on that and what we saw the last game, I would not be surprised. I don't think you'll be surprised either if there's major changes on the offense and the staff too, which I thought, honestly, dude, I thought we would already hear a little bit of rumblings on, hey, we're in talks with this guy, interviews, what have you. So I'm a little surprised that's not happening, to be honest, which doesn't mean it's not, but just something to keep your eye out on for sure. Defensively, just on this, and, we talked about kind of, and Kirby Smart talks about this too, and he's very adamant about this. He's not the only coach, but I think he was the first major program, and as with him kind of taking over as that guy when Nick Saban retired, what he says kind of reverberates throughout the coaching landscape, and oftentimes he is agreed upon. But rushing yards allowed since 21, I think this is where the depth comes into things because you have the transfer portal and the NIL era, and you lose so many backups who are needed in an SEC game in a long season. Rushing yards allowed in 21, 78.9. That's the legendary Georgia defense. I just put it in there because that's a great number, to be honest. But 22, 23, and 24 is what is interesting to me. 77.1 and 22, 113.6 and 23. That jumped up there about 40 yards. And Kirby Smart was fielding questions about this in the media, and he was like, well, depth, we got to get guys in better positions, develop them, what have you, right? And that was kind of the thing. Like, well, that's one thing that Georgia can improve on. We were talking about that in the offseason. Well, 129.6 this season. Scoring defense, kind of the same, right? And 21, 10.2, which is just that Georgia 2021 defense is just, it's always crazy to look at those numbers, man. 14.3 and 22.
Insane.
Dude, 15.6 and 23. And 20.6 this season. Now, I will say, obviously, it's gone up each season, but I will say how many bad positions that Georgia offense put this defense in all season, that has to play a huge factor in those numbers to me. But there is some regression here, Artie, and I think this season, this offseason, will be a huge barometer on how Kirby Smart is either adjusting to the times or not. Right, because you don't have the depth that they used to have. When he was at Alabama, you don't have that depth anymore. Now at Georgia with the transfer portal and stuff. So retaining guys and developing too. And then even I like your point about adding just a schematic guru on offense to where we've seen these, like you did, perfect example, Sarkisian, Kiffin. Those guys who've come in and just kind of put that NFL pedigree was like, hey, this is where football is going. You can get with it. And you really can win some games and score some points without necessarily having a 6-deep, top-of-the-line receiver room, which is so hard to field.
Pedersen, who is the Super Bowl winning coach. I forgot what his first name is. It Pedersen?
Doug Peterson?
Doug Peterson. Doug Peterson got fired. Where was Peterson before he got the Jaguars job?
The Eagles.
No, Alabama.
He wasn't.
He got fired.
Oh, did he?
The Eagles.
Did he have an analyst position? I forgot that.
He may have been the O-line coach. Honest to God.
Really?
And
I looked that
yes, and he was definitely an analyst, or at least an analyst. But I guess what I'm saying is he was I believe in the coach, Jaguars, Eagles, so 22 for 2 years. He was an analyst. And I'm almost positive. Let me make sure I'm right on this. But
live fact checking, baby. We're doing it live.
No, I'm just because what interests me about this is just like Saban had this massive network, and he started in the NFL, so it's a little bit different, right? Like he was obviously the coordinator of Belichick, but I think he started thinking outside the box because you said something that was very interesting to me. You said, like, is he going to keep up with the times? Yes, obviously he's going to keep up with the times, right? But what does that mean?
Exactly.
It goes, they already have a very well-oiled machine with, raising money, dispersing money, facilities, recruiting. But it's like, so they're experiencing the same problems everyone else is. So how can they improve internally within the program? And, I go back to, Saban would bring on everyone as an analyst, right? NFL, college, and he would just be like, be a sponge. And I think that's something that I think we should consider. You don't have to shake up the entire staff if you don't want to, but bring like just brain power in, right? Like different perspectives, different ideas. Because Sark that was his first role after he had his situation at USC. Like his first job was an analyst, and then he went back to the NFL, and then he was in Alabama, and now he's one game away from the national championship, back-to-back playoff appearances. So I don't know. That's just my thought process around it, because I do think Saban had a different mindset after like year 10.
Yeah, and Kirby Smart already did it once, right, with Todd Monken, and that worked out well. Holy crap! And look at what he's doing with the Ravens. He's like, the Ravens offense set NFL records this year. So maybe something along those lines. And I think another thing, I think we'll end it here on this at least, because we got some more to get to. But, what Monken did, I think reigns true, correct, right? Get an NFL guy in schematically. I think that's great. What I think also is a factor is Gunnar Stockton, if that's your guy, he's been in this system for a while. You want to shake that up for him and give him the challenge of preparing to be the starter and starting his full season, going a whole off season, like in that competition, like, hey, this is probably going to be my job. I think that's another factor too, but we'll see what happens. It is very early, right? Georgia just played last week. We'll see. Let's look way too early look at 25 here. So you got 4 starters to replace on the offensive line, plus Beck, Arian Smith, Dominic Lovett, Benjamin Urasek there at tight end. About 7 starters in total right now. Front 5 is gone on defense. Plus Mondon, Jalen Walker, Malachi Starks, Dan Jackson. That's your top tacklers too. Now, one thing you can say is Georgia at linebacker, even though you lose Troy Bowles and you're losing Mondon and Walker, you recruited really well. The best recruiting program at linebacker. It feels like Glenn Schumann's going to still be there, at least at now. I mean, I think he interviewed for the North Carolina job, but it's January 9th. Like we said, the coaching carousel, I mean, the big names are starting to leave. I don't know if this is the right time for him yet, but we'll see. But that's about 9 starters on defense. But I think linebacker-wise, you should be feeling pretty good as a Georgia fan. Dalen Everett at corner, will he forego in an NFL draft? That's the question we haven't heard yet. He played really good this season. It was a breakout season for him, right? You're going to get beat every now and then for a cornerback, but, man, he played really well down the stretch. I will say that. And then some key transfers here. Damon Wilson, that's a big one, Artie, because he came on strong this year. He had a big injury the year prior. Georgia loses some talent in the NFL draft, so this is his season. He plays really well. And you look at it, and it's like, well, you're going to be the starting guy because you're losing Chaz Chambliss, you're losing Michael Williams, and you're losing Jalen Walker, who both played on the outside. So this was going to be his season. He's in the portal. I've heard Ohio State's going to take a visit there. I think that's a money play. Already, it sounds like it to me, right? Because Georgia wants to retain, right? They want to spread it around, but I think defensively they might feel a little bit better about things in the offense. And they might put more money into that, which is crazy to be talking about this collegiate sports-wise, college football. We're talking about money plays, man. It's still going to take you some time to get used to that, but that's what it feels like to me. And then you're also losing Sam Mpemba and on the edge too. And then another key transfer in Anthony Evans, your returner. But a transfer portal addition should help that. But that's the challenges for Georgia. And to me, Arthur, it's the biggest turnover since 2020. So if this Georgia team makes it back to the playoff, maybe an SEC championship next year, that's going to be a heck of a coaching job with Gunnar Stockton, or maybe a transfer portal guy. But still, it's his first season in that system, in the program, whatever. Be really impressive. And I know I'm thinking way in advance here, but just looking at the challenges this staff's going to have to deal with, it's telling me that. Key transfer additions, you got Zachariah Branch. Artie, I don't know if you saw any highlights or read about Zachariah, but I'm excited about him. He's that kind of gotta have it guy to me. And dude, I posted just a simple highlight to give people an idea of maybe his movement. Because there's some guys, you know this 100%. There's some guys on a field, man, they move different. Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, those type of guys. He's one of those. Just very, very quick, right? Lateral movement's awesome. And then he has the speed to burn where he doesn't even look like he's pushing it. Former track star, freshman All-American, really good season as a freshman last year. And USC went, 7-6? It was a really bad season, dumpster fire season for USC. And, Lincoln Riley's been on the hot seat. He's still on the hot seat. It's really hot right now. It was a mess. Dropped down in production this last season. And I just had a bunch of USC fans in my comments like, he lost that. He's no longer that player. Put him in the right spot, man. Give him the right looks. And I think this kid's going to be special. You also use him as a returner. Use him as a returner. That's what I want to see. As just a football fan, I want to see that kid return punts. Former 5-star guy from USC. He's a package deal with his brother Zion Branch, and I just noted some safeties Georgia's losing. Right, you're starting safeties, and you add this kid who battled some injuries his first season. Last 2 seasons, got 41 tackles, 3 for lost sack, 3 pass breakups, 2 forced fumbles. 6'2", 210. Right, he's lengthy. See what he kind of adds to that group, because Georgia's going to have some major questions to answer there. I mean, you got KJ Bolden, some young guys who are going to step up too, but he could add to that room. I think he will. And then back to receiver here. Those two transfer together. Back to receiver here. Noah Thomas, Artie. One-on-one balls. Georgia didn't win many of those this past season. And you didn't necessarily have a body like what you're getting in Noah Thomas here to do that with. Arian Smith wasn't that guy. Dominic Lovett certainly wasn't that guy. And you got Dylan Bell, who's just kind of undersized for what you're asking of him in the red zone, man on man. Colby Young, we'll see what happens with him if he comes back. He's that guy too. But 6'6", 200 pounds, former 4-star, caught 8 touchdowns for A&M this last year. I think that's a big get too. So, boom, you ask, is Kirby Smart making changes? I think the changes are we're going to get dudes. Right? Because, adding Dominic Lovett and Ra Thomas, those were good players they added through the transfer portal, but not like this, I don't think. I think these guys are different. And I think he's trying to put that receiving issues, chaotic, just play out of, in the rearview mirror by adding these 2 guys. And that's just right now, right? So we still got a whole nother cycle to go through the transfer portal. There's still guys who haven't made their commitments yet, right? You just have to enter by the period. You don't have to commit. So there's still guys out there, and I wouldn't be surprised if Georgia adds some more here. And you also added really talented receivers who we've already talked about on this podcast through the high school ranks that I'm excited about. So get these guys some time, man. I think give him the most opportunities. What kind of irks me a little bit, Artie, is not giving these freshmen time, like snaps. When you're up 21 or you're playing an FCS school, which Georgia has, I think, 2 to start the season. They don't see the field much. And how much do you think giving them actual game snaps opposed to just practice? Okay, well, we don't think he's ready. Well, there's some guys just when the whistle blows in a game in that stadium, they take off. They prove themselves. I don't think Georgia's done that with the receiving group the last few years, to me.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't think they're receiving well.
Like Nitro Tuggle, for example.
I think this year they just lost opportunities because they lost the coaches lost trust in them. Simple as that. I think they coach. There's a phrase in coaching that say, we can only depend on the dependable, and at the end of the day, the receivers were not dependable. And that's just kind of like how it works. And unfortunately, opportunities, they're earned, right? And they're earned in practice, but they're also like you have to capitalize on the game. And I think you and I talked about this a couple weeks ago about receivers and how Georgia hasn't had like these kind of string of receivers that other schools have had. And I don't think we threw over the top a lot this year because I don't think we had a guy that was capable of doing. Well, capable is the wrong word. We didn't have a guy that proved that he could make plays in a tough spot.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope these guys can do it, right? I hope they can come in and make a difference. But ultimately, I think it comes down to, can the quarterback come to the same page, and can these guys and these players make plays when their number is called?
Yeah.
I also went down a rabbit hole. I was wrong about Pedersen. It was Brian Daboll.
Oh yeah. Okay, DeBall. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, DeBall was an analyst and a quarterbacks coach and an OC.
Yep.
Before he got the Giants job. So I knew it was some NFL guy, but
yeah. No, you're right on the example, just the wrong name. But you're right on the example. Artie, I know you got to go soon. Do you want to give me 2 quick picks? Or are you done?
Notre Dame will win. What's the number on it?
-1.
Notre Dame will win. I think Ohio State's going to roll.
I would be surprised if they roll against that pass defense from Texas. We'll see. I'll be surprised.
Dude, I'm terrified of that receiver. What's his name? Thomas?
Jeremiah Smith, dude. Julio Jones.
No, dude, that's Calvin Johnson.
Calvin?
That dude is huge.
He's 6'3". He's 6'3". His wingspan might be 7 foot the way he looks, though. I'm with you.
He's thick like Calvin Johnson, dude. He looks like when I watched that, when I was watching the first game against Tennessee, I was like, was that a tight end? And then I looked at it and I was like, no, that's Smith. That's insane.
Yeah, but he's crazy, man. I like your picks. We'll end it there. Always. I'll run with you. I'll run with you. That's it for us today, guys. We'll be back soon to talk. Really, we'll talk college football playoff, national championship next show, and whatever breaking news for Georgia we got. We'll look more into 2025. Thank you for watching live on X, on Facebook, YouTube, at the Pulse Sports Network. We appreciate it. Until next time.